During Queen Victoria's reign, the second longest in British history, after Queen Elizabeth II's reign, the British Empire reached its maximum. In this age, there were only two political parties, the Tories and the Whigs, but neither defended the rights of the proletarians. Due to this, trade unions were founded, and they were a legal organization of workers that asked for the right of going on strike to defend the rights of the workers, and they wanted to found the Labour Party. All of this was due to the poverty and squalor suffered by the proletarians. But, on the other hand, this age is also remembered because it was really rich, a really peaceful period for this nation, an age full of new technology and discoveries. Victorian age is also remembered for its Victorian compromise. We will analyze only two of them. The first one is about imperialism, whether it is a good or a bad thing. Queen Victoria ruled over such a huge empire, and she was so proud of her empire that she wanted to be called Empress of India. In fact, in 1851, Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, decided to build on the top of a hill a huge palace made of iron and glass and wood, called the Crystal Palace, where he decided to hold a great exhibition, showing products coming from everywhere in the British Empire, so that the British may somehow learn to be proud of their empire. The English didn't know much about life in the colonies, so they learned a lot by reading the novels written by Kipling and Conrad, neither of whom was British, but they described the Europeans. Rudyard Kipling was born in India, a British colony, in 1865. His parents had come to the colony to encourage and support native Indian art against the incursion of British business interests. He started a career as a reporter for an Indian newspaper, but he also wrote some short stories such as The Jungle Book and Kim, and a famous poem, The White Man's Burden, a seven-stanza poem written in 1899 on the occasion of the American invasion of the Philippines. In The White Man's Burden, Kipling justified imperialism, defining the imperial conquest as a mission of civilization, a burden, not an honor. According to Kipling, Native compared the Western colonizers to Moses, who freed the Jews from Egyptian slavery. But they didn't want to be freed from their condition of ignorance, from their naive life. They were happier before, because man is ready to give back his freedom to have a little bit of security. That's why it was so hard for Western colonizers to bring them the light of civilization. He wanted to describe life in colonies. Indeed, he shared Tory Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli's ideas that the East is a career. According to it, the best English young men were sent to colonies because it was a huge professional experience and a great sacrifice. Kipling truly believed that the Western white man had superior culture and civilization, and that they had the mission of spreading them in the unknown lands, because he was inspired by his parents' point of view and believed that that was the best thing to do. So he made an apology of European and American imperialism. In the poem, Kipling defined the native as half devils and half children, to indicate that they were as naive as the children, but they might be as violent and cruel as devils. The British, in fact, held this principle that the British Empire was a way of exporting civilization to these faraway lands. Unlike someone who thought that imperialism meant that Europeans were somehow stealing land from other people and that it was a horrible act of oppression performed by Western white people, among these intellectual writers we have the politisch Ukrainian Joseph Conrad, who knew Russian imperialism. He had a dream. He wanted to make a voyage in the heart of Black Africa. So he embarked on a steamboat and reached Congo, which at the time was a personal possession of King Leopold of Belgium. After these trips and all of the atrocities he saw, he wrote many stories about them, and he also wanted to analyze human brain processes in his novels. In the 1884 Berlin Conference, there was the European competition for territory in Africa, commonly known as the Scramble for Africa. In current quotation, imperialism is an act of oppression, where Western people invade other territory, inhabited by people who are simply different from them. And it is not possible to justify imperialism, because nobody asked Europeans to bring and impose this superior civilization. The British Empire was called the British Commonwealth, a way of making these people who were subject to British rule as somehow friends to England, the same thing that happened during the Roman Empire. This way, they thought that they could try to keep the empire together. Out of Darkness is a semi-autobiographical novel in which Joseph Conrad makes observation about the evils of colonialism, reminding his readers that the Romans were doing the very same thing nearly 20 centuries before. He showed the physical horrors of colonialism and the incursion and exploitation made by the white introducer upon the native, and he said that it is a merry dance of death and trade. Colonialism is a consequence of men's voracious anger for power. The protagonist of this short novel is Charlie Marlowe, and he has been hired by a Belgian company that traded in African ivory. His mission is to travel to accompany a post called the Inner Station in Congo to look for a man named Kurt, who has not been in touch with his home office in Belgium for some time. Kurt is an English agent of French and German origin. He represented all Europe, and it's funny to observe, to focus on it, who moved to Congo as a colonizer. He is the best ivory trader. He is described as a genius, as a philosopher, as a poet, as a painter. And at the beginning, he tried to impose his Western culture to the natives, but he is seduced by the tribal rite and by the native culture. During his trip, Marlowe finds a painting made by Kurtz with a blind old man who carries a lamp and on the floor a naked set man. His painting symbolizes Western colonizer who justify imperialism by saying that it is a mission and that they bring the Western civilization to primitives. But indeed, they are blind. They are made blind by their avidity and by their thirst of power. Marlowe collects information about Kurtz, and when Marlowe meets him, it is an epiphany for him, because Marlowe is actually looking for a model to follow, and he finds him in Kurtz. And it's important to pay attention to Kurt's agony, Kurt's last word, and the impact on Marlowe and on his future life once back to Europe. Kurt is an ill man now, and Marlowe has to bring him back to Europe, but Kurt dies before the steamboat sails, and he is in Kurt's cabin during his agony. His eyes are looking in the He is looking back at all his life in flashback. He exclaimed, "The horror, the horror!" And we can interpret Kurt's last word in several ways. The horror could refer to imperialism itself, made of violence, oppression, injustice. But it could refer also to the human condition, to death, and also to the violent and cruel inner drives of every man, which he learned to love while he lived with the natives. Marlowe returned to Europe after that. He says he can't stand to be around ordinary people who don't know the thing he knows. Marlowe's story is over, and they start to go up the Thames towards London, but the narrator says the Thames seems to lead into the heart of an immense darkness, suggesting that this civilized place is not far removed from the primitive jungle. Marlowe's voyage may be interpreted as a trip from the most industrialized river to the remotest one, but also as a trip in the most remote part of our consciousness, so our unconsciousness, as an irrational trip, because people in Congo are primitive and are not fitted with and they are not fitted with superstructures. So, this is the first compromise we should say between two different opinions, if imperialism is or not a good thing. The second one is the double life that Victorian citizens lived, public and private life. Victorians were great moralizers. They were more interested in their public image than in their private consideration of themselves. It was more important for them to look respectable than to be respectable. The Victorian era was basically sexophobic. It was not convenient to talk about sex, to even make allusion to sex. And this can give us an idea of how obsessed Victorians were. When one is obsessed with something, in this case with sex, it means that he or she has a one-track mind, a man that set on this idea. Some Victorian personalities led a double life. They used to have a wife and some kids in London, but they secretly cultivated other love affairs outside London, where they introduced themselves even with different names, in order to preserve their respectability. So Victorians had three lives: a public life, a private life, and a secret life. Their respectability becomes a prison of that image they have built of themselves, but they knew it was hard to repress those unspeakable and animal-like desires. About this second compromise, we can mention the famous quotation from Robert Louis Stevenson's novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Every man is not truly one, but truly two. Dr. Henry Jekyll is a respectable scientist, and all he cares of was preserving his respectability. But he starts posing a question about a feeling he feels inside himself, a dark side of him which needs to be expressed. But if he lets some unacceptable vices, such as getting drunk, going to dirty pubs, express themselves, his respectability will be destroyed. So, as a scientist, he starts thinking of a way of getting rid of those drives that he feels inside himself. And he has this great idea of splitting his personality into two men, Dr. Henry Jekyll and Mr. Edward Hyde. The last one appears every time Henry Jekyll secretly drinks a potion that changes his face, his body, and lets this alter ego emerge. Edward Hyde, who has the looks for an animal, is short and has a hairy body. Edward Hyde is what Freud called the unconscious. He leaves his house unseen by his servants, using the back door. Hyde indulging in all vices, which Jekyll feels ashamed of. Edward Hyde grows taller and stronger, and Jekyll doesn't manage to control it anymore. Transformations start to become spontaneous. The potion doesn't work anymore. Hyde indicates a character who seems to live a hidden life, and Jekyll we can pronounce Jekyll. The name itself has a dark, gloomy, horrible side he is able to kill. So, to stop Hyde, Jekyll ends up committing suicide. This is the demonstration that the experiment always fails. You cannot split the two poles of the personality of a man, just like you cannot split the two poles of a magnet. They have to coexist. Stevenson stressed that if these instincts are kept inside, they may poison human life. To highlight the Victorian hypocrisy, we can also analyze Oscar Wilde's works of art. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, and his parents were highly educated and wealthy. His mother, Francesca Speranza, was an Irish activist, a poet and a journalist. Actually, when she wrote articles, she signed it up with the name Speranza, taken from her motto Speranza Fidanza Costanza. While he was in London with his mother, Oscar attended a literary event where he met Constance Lloyd, a young girl who was able to to read Dante in Italian. This is what fascinated both Oscar and his mother Francesca, but also her name fascinated her mother because it reminded their motto. So they got married, but Oscar secretly met other guys, and the greatest love of his life was Alfred Douglas. They started a love affair. Oscar had a trouble with Alfred's father, and he had to be sued, and after the trial, he was condemned to 2 years of hard labor, and he had to spend 2 years at the Reading jail. During these 2 years, on the other hand, he wrote the Ballad of the Reading Jail and the Profundis, a long letter dedicated to Alfred Douglas and explored several themes, such as art, the artist's role, genuine talent, and the Victorian moralizing and hypocrisy. And it's important to focus on how Oscar was an enemy inside his own society, whose was a great example because he made his life a real exhibition. So, the picture of Dorian Gray is his only novel because he wrote for theatre, plays, not novels. For example, The Importance of Fairness and an idea of husband. All comedians because he used the instrument of irony to make some kind of mockery of Victorians. What he wants to portray is how hypocritical Victorians were. The first edition of the novel was censored because it was somehow pornographic according to Victorians. So, such as a novel was considered misleading for young men who reading that novel could be influenced into an unacceptable lifestyle. So Oscar Wilde was forced to publish the novel in a second edition, but he attached a preface where he said that art is there for no reason. We do not have a use in art. When you read a novel, watch a play or a picture, you are not looking for a use. A book does not want to teach anything. There's no moral message in a work of art. A work of art is simply beautiful or not beautiful. And we can focus on the plot of the picture of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray is a young aristocratic man of stunning beauty. A painter, Basil Hallward, decided to paint his portrait because he wanted to make his beauty eternal, as well as romantic poet did. The painter fell in love with Dorian. Indeed, he didn't want to sell his portrait, but decided to give it to Dorian as a love gift. When the portrait is complete, Basil shows it to his friend Lord Henry Wotton, a nobleman who belongs to the new hedonism movement. Henry met Dorian in Basil's study. Henry exposed to the young man his theories about hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, the rejection of the rigid Victorian values. According to Henry, Dorian needed to use his beauty to get everything he wanted, because time is jealous of him, and worse again is his lilies and roses, he said. Is some kind of hedonism about enjoying everything and leave any kind of excesses. He was excited by the fact that just for being beautiful, he was painted by Basil, and this is an epiphany for Oscar. So, now he starts his downfall from a condition of innocence to one of cynicism and selfishness. He breaks the heart of a ballet dancer, Sybil Vane, who commits suicide when he dumps her. Dorian was not in love with her as a woman, but he was in love with her heart. He indulges in unacceptable action, but he becomes aware that he never gets old. On the other hand, he noticed that the image in the picture becomes older and uglier every time he commits a crime. That drives him crazy. He hides the picture in the most secret room in the palace. He looks at the door, and when he shows Basil Hallward the horrible transformation of the picture, he stabs him out of rage. In the end, Dorian wants to break the curse which links him to the picture, and, using a knife, he tries to destroy it. On the following day, the servant finds him dead body, while the picture is perfectly intact. This is the effect of Henry Wotton on Dorian. Dorian used to be a decent, honest young man. He used to believe in morality, in the social code and in the social rules. But now that he has become a hedonist, he only cares about his pleasure. Pleasure becomes the rule, the law, the principle of Dorian's life. He has lost his ideals, and so can remind us the myth of Narcissus and the myth of Faust and at the same time, because Narcissus died because he fell in love with his own image in the mirror, and Faust gave his soul in order to have an infinite knowledge, such as Dorian gave his soul in order to have an eternal youth. Whereas in Stevenson's novel, Jekyll's alter ego is Hyde, in the picture of Dorian Gray, Dorian's alter ego is portrayed. So, like in the novel written by Stevenson, he ends up destroying himself. But it is important to focus on one aphorism of Oscar Wilde that said, Dorian is what I would like to be, Basil is who I think I am, and Derry is what the world thinks I am. And that can remind us the Victorian morality, the Victorian point of view. George Orwell's real name is Eric Blair, and he was born in India. He traveled around Europe and took part in the Spanish Civil War against Francisco Franco's regime. He worked for the British Broadcasting Company, the BBC, and he was basically a novelist. He usually dressed up in order to report reality. He wrote Animal Farm and 1984. Animal Farm is an anti-Stalinist allegory about the dangers of totalitarian regime, of the abuse of propaganda, and of the naive working class. Animal Farm allegories the rise of Joseph Stalin and the struggle between Trotsky and Stalin, emerging the rivalry between Snowball and Napoleon, two of the protagonists of Animal Farm. Animal Farm is a fairy tale, but fictional characters correspond to real historical figures related to Russian history. The final message is that revolutions are useless, as things come full circle to the status quo ante after the revolution. Farmer Jones abuses animals who inhabit the manor farm. He lets them starve, he doesn't look after them. So Old Major, one of the pigs, teach them the principle on animalism, but he dies before the revolution. The animals rebel and expel John. They take over the farm with their name Animal Farm, but at the end of the story, Napoleon, that we can compare to Stalin, became a new Farmer John, because having new leaders wears anything people want to hear, only to get vote, and after all they come back on their path and nothing changes. 1984 was a dystopian novel. A fictional future is described where the world is dominated by three totalitarian superstates, Eurasia, Eurasia and Oceania. Oceania is ruled by a group known as the Party and Soch, English Socialism. The leader of it is Big Brother, a figure that no one has ever seen. It is not even clear if he really exists. In order to make any revolution impossible, the party has severally reduced the English language to newspeak, a new language, so that it was impossible for people to exchange ideas and organize a revolution. The main character is Winston Smith. He works at the Ministry of Truth, and the party controls every sort of information, rewriting the content of all newspapers and history books for its purposes. The party doesn't allow individuals to keep records of their past, such as photographs of documents or diaries. Manipulating the past, the party can actually control the present and justify all of its action. Watson wanted to keep a diary, and he secretly studies Goldstein theories. theories. He is a revolutionist. He can be compared to Trotsky. And Watson fell in love with Julia, a woman who worked at the Ministry of Law. And when meeting with O'Brien, Winston and Julia proclaim their hate for the party. Winston is cuffed by the top police and taken to the Ministry of Law, and after being physically tortured, is finally taken to room 101, and after he said, "Do it to Julia," he betrayed Julia and his spirit is broken and now is converted to Orthodoxy. We can focus our attention on the three slogans of the party visible everywhere: war is peace, freedom is labor, and ignorance is strength. And it is important also to nominate George Orwell's essay, Politics and the English Language, that is a profound critique of the decline of language and its use in politics. Orwell argues that the English language is in decline due to poor usage and the influence of political and economical factors. He claims that unclear and convoluted language is often used deliberately to disguise the truth and manipulate public opinion.